but there we go. Right, let's get on then. That's like a little hint from Butter just to get us moving on. So thanks, folks, for sharing LinkedIn profiles. Connect with each other, say hi. This is like the fun of it, and thank you for joining. I want to say today, this evening, wherever you are, welcome. I'm just gonna keep letting people in as they pop in, so forgive me if I get distracted. Thank you for being here. Like, we've got a load of stuff to talk about here, and so I'm going to dive right in a minute. But welcome to another Open Org webinar. I am joined by Mark and Adam, who I will let you both do some proper intros in a minute, because I'll do a terrible job of it if I try and do it. So I'll hand you the mic and let you say hi. But we're here to talk about future of HR tech and all about automation journeys and like personalization in what is like becoming a real big distraction economy. So we're going to unpack what some of that means over the next hour or so. We're going to hear a little bit from Mark and Adam on what they're seeing out there, how they're designing their own companies, and also how people leaders can start to think about the choices they make in HR tech, and also how they build people experience as well. So loads and loads to unpack here. I'm going to just take a minute though, just to intro or let Mark and Adam intro yourselves before we get stuck in. So Mark, you happy to jump in first?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Mark, CEO at Crewmojo. Our roots very much started in the performance management space, but we quickly learned those two words often mean something very different in different organizations. So really, we now see performance management as orchestrating success along key moments of the employee journey to help employees be successful, whether that's getting clarity, whether it's feedback, coaching, all manner of moments during that journey. And really that's what we do. We help HR teams to build simple workflows that remove friction, anticipate employee needs in those moments, and hopefully exceed their expectations as well. And one last little shout out, I can see Lou on the call. I've just clicked that's Lou from Tomorrow's People, I think. So hi to Lou, good to see some familiar faces and names.
Awesome, thanks Mark. Adam, say hi.
Hello. Yes, so my background, I actually studied IT, software development, way back when, but very quickly moved into sort of HR roles. So most of my sort of roles have been in the sort of tech space for the last decade or so. That was like leading and scaling people teams for Aussie startups and scale-ups. And about 12 months ago, I sort of set up my own business, Give a Damn, play on Adam. I would like to say I came up with it myself, but my mate came up with it in a pub after a few beers. Yeah, I now basically help sort of like teams, sometimes people teams, not always people teams, but basically apply like product thinking, sort of human-centered design principles to how to design scaling people experiences. So moving away from traditional HR approaches and embracing something different.
Awesome, thanks Adam. And you will hear less from me today, folks, but quick intro for me. I am the other Adam in the room. I'm co-founder of a company called Open Org. So if you're not familiar with us yet, we're probably a little bit more known in the UK and Europe and US, I'd suggest, but come check us out. We combine content creation, community building, a little bit of consulting to help make learning and execution way easier for startup HR folks. So come have a peek around. Like I say, you won't hear as much from me today. I'm going to give the mic as much to Mark and Adam. But we are here to talk all about future of HR tech. And again, just now I threw a load of words at you that I think we thought it'd be really cool to sort of just baseline that just before we really get stuck into this a little bit. Things like journeys and not so much automation, but distraction economy gets thrown around a lot in my day-to-day, and a lot of people have very different views about what that means. So I thought this would be a nice starting point for us, just to sort of baseline what we're going to be talking about here. Who wants to kick off? Distraction economy, I'd love to know a little bit about what we're talking about here. Adam, maybe, like, I know you've got some sort of thoughts on this.
Yeah, so this is something that particularly this last client that I was working with, where I was working specifically with the engineering team, so brought in by the CTO, and helping them design like a capability framework. And I noticed this sort of like coming up so often in that work, where we were sort of like trying to like move forward and get things going on, but actually capturing the attention of the people was really, really challenging, far more challenging than it has probably been previously. So I think this distraction economy concept, if you haven't heard before, sort of refers to the fact that, like, you know, there's a lot of businesses, technologies, and media who are basically out there competing, you know, and profiting from your attention. Obviously, social media is kind of the most kind of common, but their aim is to kind of keep you as distracted and stimulated and engaged on their platform for as long as possible, because the longer they can do that, the more they can push advertising. And I think a lot of people think that the distraction economy sort of stops at social media and our phones when we're outside of work, but actually it's alive inside work as well. And a lot of the technologies that we're sort of using within work are now borrowing the same sort of principles to try and like kind of keep you sort of focused. So what you're seeing is like people are just like overloaded by like constant like updates, messages coming from Slack, email, you know, every other communication medium that you might have. Couple that with like people being rewarded for like reacting fast instead of like thinking deeply, you know, being pulled in these multiple directions, endless context switching. What I sort of have found more and more is that people's like readiness to receive, process, apply new information is basically shot. It doesn't really exist anymore. And so as a result, the things that we're trying to push out there, even if they're the most important ideas, are actually struggling to stick because people simply don't have the mental bandwidth to process them. So that really sort of like has to shift and shape how we're designing our work and how we're trying to communicate.
This is like, this is personal opinion, but is it worse or harder to do that? Like this remote world, like when you were in a meeting room previously, like it's harder to get distracted, I think, or like unless you want to be super rude. But like now when you're at home, you've got a screen in front of you, it's easier to see those updates pop up. So again, this factors into like, it's already there before things like AI, etc., have come into the conversation as well. So it's been on that sort of radar for a while.
Definitely. Yep.
Mark, talk to us about journeys. That's the other sort of part of the puzzle we wanted to sort of unpack a little bit today.
Yeah, just before I do as well, I'll just add to what Adam was saying. It really like brings home for me the distraction economy. Like I'm consuming LinkedIn feed, I'm going for a run and I'm consuming podcasts, I'm getting email newsletters that I love receiving, and I'm literally finding now, because I'm pretty much consuming nearly all the time new content, I'm struggling when I go in to actually have a conversation with someone and I'll say, hey, I've got 3 key points on this, and I'll speak to my first key point, and then I'll be like, what's the second and the third again? And I'm literally struggling to remember what these things are. So if we're expecting people to remember processes and you know, something that they learned in training from a week ago, it's a tough call if people are, you know, that swamped with information. Going on to journeys, I would describe journeys in work as a reflection of taking a user-centric approach, and we'll get into that a bit more detail later. But for example, I kind of want to draw a contrast. Like we might label a process as goal setting, and I see that as really just a corporate jargon name, and it can mean a lot of different things. But from an employee's perspective, it's a moment about getting clarity, and it's about clarity for what's expected of them, where should they focus their attention, what good looks like, what's the context of what's important for the company. And when you start to think of it through that lens, it's not just about putting a goal form in front of someone. It's actually the comms that goes with it, what framework you're using. You know, is this for development goals or is it for KPI goals? They might have a first draft of what they produce. They might then have a one-on-one meeting with a manager. They might go back, tweak their goals based on that feedback, consider how they're going to track and manage, and you may even have a pulse question at the end to ask them if this process was useful. Now, when we think of a journey, a journey turns all of those scattered tasks into a seamless, like guided flow, removing what we were just talking about, the cognitive load of how to stitch that process together. So we're actually doing that for them, and also recognizing that a manager journey is going to be different to an employee's journey. The manager's got their own goals that they're doing, but they're also playing a part in the journey of the employee. So they're working out how can they fit in 8 one-on-one meetings with each of their team members to give them feedback on their goals. So it's understanding the same process might have different participants and different needs. And really that's what it means to be user-centric, is recognizing those different user stories and helping to guide each of those stories step by step.
Love it. Adam, have you got any builds on that before I move on? Because I
think we're going to see that like more and more. It's like very difficult to create these like bespoke experiences previously, especially if you're using tech and they just had like one workflow built in and kind of that was it. But when you actually like think about it, and this will come through in a lot of what we talk about in the future, but like the work that say an engineer does is very different to the work that a say customer support person does. And so this idea that like one size fits all, it just, when you actually think about what we're asking people to do, that, you know, we need to be thinking differently and working with the actual environment. So yeah, just couldn't agree more around the importance of like, you know, identifying the user needs and kind of like building upon that.
Love that. Okay. So what are you both seeing out there at the moment in your separate like worlds? So this is quite interesting for me because Mark, you've maybe come at this from a more of a building a tech company sort of lens. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing companies doing. Adam, you've got this like amazing consulting exposure, but also the very like recent people leader experience as well. You probably put on. So talk to me a little bit about like what you're seeing going wrong out there based on the framing that you've both just shared, and like why you think it's maybe going wrong.
I'll go first. I think really what we're seeing is being driven from a business perspective. So it's not just something that like HR are responding to, because if things are not working, then they're simply being discarded. So I can give 3 examples across different areas. So from a performance perspective, a compliance perspective, and an employee experience perspective. So Adam already touched on one of those, which is one size fits all performance. And this is especially challenging for orgs that have, you know, more than a couple of hundred employees, where the workforce starts to become diverse. Well, literally last week, I was speaking with an NDIS provider. For those who are not in Australia, NDIS provides care services using a lot of frontline staff. They've got 2,500 employees, and their effectively their performance process they had, largely around the review process, was completely standardized by the software that they were using, and it was effective for office-based workers. When it came to the actual frontline workers, it was just a complete mismatch. It was a generic form fill, if you like, and it was so irrelevant that they decided to actually stop doing that process. And then they've stepped back and gone, hang on a minute, the majority of our workforce, where we're hoping to get a return on this investment, is actually our frontline workers. So we need to be thinking about how we can support them with a more effective performance process. So what fixes this? Again, Adam just touched on it, was personalisation. So being able to tailor an experience to a particular audience. So you might have one experience for frontline and then a different experience for the office team. And those experiences can be relative to the time that they have available, the environment that they're working in, but ultimately figuring out how to personalise. Second example is compliance processes. We're seeing more and more now compliance processes that are really well documented in handbooks or policies, but they're not guided. Now, to bring that one to life, we recently had a customer who had it's a financial services customer. They have a policy around remuneration reviews, and at certain times of the year, employees can request a REM review. Now, this policy they have is in line with a lot of governance structures. So there's a lot of check gates, and it's things like, are they on a secondment? If they are, they're not entitled for a review. If they're on a performance improvement plan, they're not entitled for a review. Once they get endorsement from their manager, then it goes to like a CFO, and there's like bringing in different data. Are they inside or outside of current pay bands? There's a employee experience manager also comes in and provides an assessment. And at each stage, in total, they've got 5 different people that are contributing to this process. And every time employees were requesting this review, one of the most important processes for an employee, if they're going to get a pay increase, it was falling through the cracks, and they're constantly having to follow up, find out where it had stalled, who it was with. So what we found with these guys was the fix was actually taking that policy and creating a multi-person journey. And only when, say, the CFO's role becomes important, does it pop up for them to have their part, check the data that's been collated through that journey, which is all nicely collated, so they can actually they're in a position to make a decision, and then it gets passed on to the next stage. Really, the journey is making sure that each person is guided through that right or correct moment, correct job at the correct time. The third example I give where things are not working is more of a missed opportunity, I'd say, and it's inconsistent employee experience moments. And I believe a lot of that comes down to managers simply not knowing about certain events that are happening on their team. And again, we've got some great examples of customers adding more and more moments into these journeys. So it's things like, at its simplest, recognizing an employee's, say, 5-year anniversary or 10-year anniversary. We're making it easy for these managers by letting them know, hey, in this month upcoming, you've got this team member who's coming up to a 5-year anniversary. This is the budget that you've got to spend on it. These are some of the activities that you might want to consider, and would love it if you could capture in this space here what you did to celebrate. So it's actually bringing accountability around that process of celebrating someone's important milestone in the business. So it's really giving managers the knowledge that they wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise, and using automation off of HRIS data. So it's in the system, you know what their start date, an employee's start date was. So it's absolutely possible to trigger things like anniversary-based celebrations. Across all those examples, the issue isn't intent, it's typically execution. And HR have often built a lot of these policies or processes or frameworks, but they're not making it to that moment that's needed. So by automating and personalizing, we can really start to shift the way that comes to life.
You started to answer one of the questions I had in my mind, was like, for the first 2 examples in particular, I was trying to work out, do you think teams are not doing this stuff because the tech to do it well hasn't existed up until recently? I know there's some stuff out there that can handle this really well now, that is really starting to grow, but has the tech been there to allow for this well, or is it just that teams are not taking the time to properly map out employee journeys and understand, to our earlier points, what does the day in the life of this person here look like versus this person, and what are those moments that matter? Because that takes a lot of work to do, and it's even harder to do if you haven't got the tech to do it. So like, where's your thoughts there? Like, are we making excuses, or is the tech there and enabling people to do it?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Up until 2 or 3 years ago, the tech really hasn't been there to support it. You've got a very similar suite of tools to have chosen from, and it makes it too time consuming to make personalization to an individual journey at scale. So I think that's a key one. The other point to note is how would I describe it? It's like accepted ways of operating for HR, I feel, are rapidly changing. So there's a certain set of expectations historically, which has been around, you've got to design a process, whatever that looks like. It's typically a policy. It gets announced via a PowerPoint and an all hands meeting, and then there's an expectation that employees are going to do this process through compliance. That whole operating model is now really shifting, and it's much more acceptable to be taking a more iterative approach, to be engaging team members in this process of understanding what an experience would, how do you help someone to get clarity in their job? How do you help someone to receive feedback in a moment? How do you tie that, make sure that feedback's meaningful? All of that co-design is becoming a lot more acceptable, and that iterative approach is really powering this whole movement.
Nice. What about you, Adam? What's your thoughts on where you're seeing stuff going wrong on your side?
Yeah, so I think certainly the first thing I'm seeing builds on what you've both just said. And so it is this like mismatch in terms of like just way of working. So, you know, businesses are kind of asking their teams to sort of like move faster, deliver more, work in a more iterative sort of fashion, pushing for more performance, basically do more with less. But a lot of our people approaches from a HR perspective are still kind of built in isolation from the business. So we're not actually talking to people and understanding what's actually going to help here. And often that mindset shift, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in more detail, but like we're building in a traditional sense, like prioritizing like control, predictability, hierarchy, kind of like risk aversion. And what I'm seeing is that that's actually leading to many people teams, at least here in Australia, and I think it's a broader thing, kind of having their values questioned. Budgets being cut, redundancies being made, you know, the function just not being seen as like mission critical. And so this mismatch is creating like a bunch of friction. Leaders aren't seeing value in the people processes. Teams are feeling locked into these old archaic people processes that are just tick box exercises. And the poor people teams are feeling underappreciated because like we're working, you know, arguably harder than ever to try and prove our value. But actually we're doubling down on old ways that aren't matched to kind of like what the business is kind of needing. I think we kind of like jump to solutions without really, I put here sort of like doing the deep work. Which goes to your point, Adam, around it takes longer. I think it probably does initially, but actually once you sort of embrace this different approach, it actually speeds you up doing this work up front. Yeah, I think Mark's actually already given some great examples there around performance cycles that just aren't matching the actual needs of the work that people are kind of doing. Some other sort of like broader trends outside of like the HR thing, like this sort of performative busyness, if you will. Like everyone's calendars are like totally packed, expected to respond instantly. You know, urgency and busyness are worn like a badge of honor. But like when everything feels urgent, all of a sudden nothing kind of does. Like people stop kind of like responding, at least with kind of like thought, not because they don't care, because their nervous systems are just bloody cooked. And so like the space for like meaningful work, deep work, sort of intentional thinking, you know, at best is pushed into the evenings or weekends. But, you know, at worst isn't happening at all. And I think you see this playing out in like just burnout epidemics across, you know, definitely the people space. I can't remember the last time I spoke to a people leader that hadn't experienced burnout. And I myself have gone through like multiple periods of burnout. So yeah, that's kind of like at a sort of like an individual level, this push for more and more, and yet we just don't have more to give. You know, and then to double down on that, make it even worse, you know, lots of, you know, talk of new strategies from leaders, you know, kind of big new strategy launches every 12 months, promising, you know, this is going to be the thing that drives the company forward. Most of the time developed in isolation from the people actually doing the work. And so it really just isn't sticking. You know, there's all these big launches, hype, you know, polished, slick sort of stuff. But people are just treating the messages like noise because they've become cynical. Managers probably weren't involved, so people are asking questions, but the managers can't really translate. They're stuck in this thing of like, well, I'm trying to look after my team, so I've kind of, you know, they end up erring on the side of, yeah, look, I don't know what's going on either, but we'll be okay, type stuff going on. And so, yeah, you have a big strategy launch, and then 2 months later, nothing's really changed. At best, they might remember the presentation, but nothing's really changed in the business. And so, yeah, that push for greater performance has just fallen flat. You know, at worst, what's actually happened is like, you know, there's a greater sense of pressure, anxiety, burnout, and resentment from both sides. You know, what I'm seeing is like leaders are starting to kind of like trust their employees less. And then employees are so cynical towards leaders that they're not trusting them. So certainly I've seen this trend of like trust in leadership and between those two groups just like diminishing, which kind of makes it really hard to kind of, you know, launch anything really.
Yeah, there's like a little, I don't know how universal this phrase is for a call at this time of day, but there's like a bit like boy cried wolf type scenario there with like leaders trying different things, and like we're all in a very similar boat, I think. Like people don't know what's coming next with the future of things like AI and tech and so on and so forth, and we're all sort of guessing mode a little bit at the moment. I know from an open org standpoint, like John and I are trying our best to like pause and like really think about like, rather than just churning out more stuff, like what do we think the next few years looks like? How can we safeguard our own business and like build something that's going to actually be valuable to someone in a few years? And we don't know what that looks like right now, and we need a lot of like ideation time and thinking time and deep time to actually like step back a bit, and that's really hard for us to find as a two-person team, but I think it's really important. And one thing I've seen and continue to see is like people teams in particular don't have the space to do that. Like they are swamped. They don't have the space to step back and think. And to your earlier point, Adam, boundaries are becoming blurrier and blurrier for the people team. Like you mentioned that their value is being questioned more and more. I think the boundaries that they operate within are becoming harder to actually define. And there's opportunity there as well. But again, it feels very hard to actually, you feel a bit lost. So lots of problems.
Yeah.
Lots of problems.
Yeah, I'll just build on that.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, you did a call last month, a webinar with Ben from Charlie HR. Is it Charlie HR?
Yeah.
Good. My memory's working. That was a late call for me, joining that one from the UK. So, but you know, like there was something. So he's an incredible leader. If you haven't heard of him, check him out. Follow what he says. But one of the reasons he's an incredible leader is like they had a huge amount of transparency in the way they run that business. But it's not just the transparency; it's the follow through. And I think that's the thing. Like if I think back to one of the companies I worked at. You know, the first time we did a strategic offsite, the company was genuinely excited about what we were saying and really keen to help and get involved. It felt like a big new direction for us. But we didn't deliver. And so it's this ability to like say something and then follow through. To actually like back up what it is you're saying. And we're trying to say so many things that we don't have the time to actually back up and deliver. And that's what causes the loss of trust. You know, it's like, well, this is just, you've said this before. And it got to the point towards the end of my time at that company where like anytime there was an offsite, like the whole business would like just recoil in like fear of like, oh shit, here's a whole bunch of extra work that's going to be chucked on top of what I'm already doing that isn't actually going to make a difference because no one's bothered to check whether this was the right thing to do. And that was in a cycle of like 3 years, going from like optimism and belief to cynicism and just like anxiety. So yeah,
that's where like coming full circle a bit, that's where some of the personalization stuff, I assume actually there's an opportunity there, not just to counteract the distraction economy stuff and like deliver the right information to the right person at the right time, but there's a trust building piece there as well. The more personalized you make something, the better the relationship you build with them. So if we can nail this part of it, like we can solve that piece. And I assume anyway. But maybe that segues us a little bit into like the next piece, because I'd love to know, not to put any pressure on you both, but like you are both in like a space where you are actively trying to solve this problem in different ways. Like Adam, again, you're coming at this from consulting service provider type capacity, where you're spending probably a lot of time with people, teams, and companies to fix this in a certain way. And Mark, you're trying to build the technology that can solve this problem as well. So again, would love to hear from you both. Like, what are you doing to try and solve for this particular problem? Any really like great examples or stuff you could share would be really cool.
First, Mark.
Thanks. I think the point about personalisation is spot on, because by personalising, you're removing the noise that would be a blanket message otherwise. So I think that's a really, really key point. For us as a tech provider, what we're doing is really it's changing from where we were. So for a long time, we had, when I look at what we had in the platform, it was separate menus for each feature, and it was like reviews, one-on-ones, goals, surveys, feedback. And it was maybe 3 years ago or so, started coming to our radar when a big customer said, really, they called us out and they said that employees were having to jump between disconnected features. And for them to make that work, they were building separate guides and help documents, which they were probably housing in SharePoint or other places that their employees needed to go access to be able to kind of stitch their process together. And that to us was kind of like a slap in the face, because we'd spent a lot of time designing the platform, and it kind of dawned on us at that point that we had built a lovely looking user interface, but a fairly ordinary user experience. And that for us was a real turning point. We flipped our entire thinking to a truly user-centric approach. And it's been a long journey, but we're pretty much here now. We've literally got rid of every one of those traditional menu-based features, and instead we're now presenting to employees this one space where little journeys will appear on their dashboard when they're needed, and literally handhold them through an entire process from start to finish. Each journey might well stitch together multiples of those traditional features. So it might be that there's a goal form, there's a one-on-one meeting, there's a feedback survey at the end, but it's doing the job of stitching those features together. And from an HR perspective, it's no longer about configuring a process or configuring people into a process. Instead, it's like a workflow canvas where you configure the user experience for each of the participants that are in that process. That journey, this is like a bonus that we discovered, is it makes it much easier then to target that journey. So we can then allow HR teams to deliver that particular journey to a given employee or audience, and you can then start small and iterate before actually scaling to a bigger population. So it allows to deploy a particular experience, get feedback. Is it actually working the way you anticipated it would on paper in real life? And if it turns out that it's too cumbersome or too much overhead, it gives an opportunity to bring that feedback in and iterate the process.
Is that something that's a little bit more visual for people teams then to work with? To my point earlier, like, if we don't have the technology in place to enable this to happen, like you mentioned canvases, for example. So do you think that's a helpful addition for people to be able to actually visualize and map out these journeys? And is that what you're building with Crewmojo, or is it a little bit different to that?
No, it's exactly that. And it's in line with, like, we'll probably talk a little bit about it shortly, but it's in line with what product teams are doing with using tools that are like Zapier, N8N, all of these sort of automation tools are now starting with a canvas, and it's allowing people to visually create these journeys and experiences, and we have shifted our platform to provide that level of like canvas. The other part to it is making sure that people can get off of the starting blocks, so they're not starting with a blank canvas, and that's something that's on our way as well.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I haven't played around with this yet, but I think that ChatGPT have now got similar like workflow canvas stuff that they've released as well in the last however many days. I'm sure it will change in a couple of days as well, but yeah, it's amazing. There's a lot of people shifting in that direction, so it's cool to hear that you guys are doing that. What about you, Adam? Like, what do you like? How are you designing your like approach and your services when you're speaking to customers?
Yeah, so I think it kind of evolved whilst I was working for a company called Papercart. So it was like the first like startup and scale up that I sort of like built a people team around. And actually, I remember now I did like a human-centered design course through IDEO like 4 weeks before I joined that, and that was definitely, if I look back now, like inspirational around like just thinking about things from a different sort of approach. Because like most of the frameworks that we build and deliver and they fail might not necessarily be because they're wrong. It's kind of more that like they're outpacing kind of like people's cognitive readiness to take on board what it is we're trying to share. But most importantly, I think this is to Mark's point, is they miss the context where the work actually happens. So you can build like this awesome resource, but if people don't connect that resource to the problem in the work and then access it at the time they face the problem, it's useless. This is why you get a lot of people being, oh yeah, that people thing, yeah, I remember a presentation, but but they're not thinking about it in the moment when they're experiencing that work. And I think part of this comes down to what I've started to sort of realize in the last like month is that like HR, we have this like unhealthy obsession with like the 10% of work that touches HR policy and practice. And we treat it as if it's like the most important thing in the world. For us, it might be, but for everyone else, I can assure you it is absolutely not. And like no one jumps up in the morning and says, oh shit, can't wait to jump into the HR system today. And so like we kind of, yes, we have to get our 10% right, but I think the future for us is like looking more to helping shape the other 90% of the experience of work that actually makes a difference. But so for me, in terms of how I'm doing that and how I'm helping my kind of like clients now sort of do that is like adopting principles like human-centered design, product thinking, in terms of how we're actually actively designing the experience of work. Now it's a space with lots of jargon, and this kind of goes to the point you were asking Mark around like, good tech can help because you can like visualize it and it's far easier to process. But in practice, trying to simplify what does that actually mean? It means starting with actually trying to understand real user needs first and foremost. Like, what are we actually solving for here? And then trying to actually like, test your ideas, and test your assumptions in the real context to see whether your assumptions actually hold. So if I'm going to build a manager guide, for example, I'm assuming that someone's actually going to read that manager guide. But I should test that assumption before I go and invest in a shit ton of manager guides. So it goes back to this idea of like designing for like readiness, not perfection. I think, a lot of the times our approach would have been to like try and solve everything first. But, like if I'm trying to design, I used to design like, I had a manager actually, this is going to be a reference for people in Australia only. I'll try and make it less. So my manager used to say, look, we're not interested in building a Rolls Royce. We're interested in building a, forward focus. And it's this idea of the fact that like, what's the reality of where your people are? And on the journey, maybe you're trying to get to a 10, but if they're at a 3 and you're trying to design for a 10, like that's a huge jump you're not going to be able to make. So focusing on, okay, let's go from 3 to 4 and then, 4 to 5. So it's that like iterative sort of approach. Trying to measure impact, not just through like, hey, we launched a system, cool, but like what behaviors and business outcomes actually got better. So I think a lot of people treat engagement as like the lagging indicator, and that like that's the thing we care about. Whereas like engagement for me is actually like it's a leading indicator. If we drive engagement and it goes up, what got better in the business? And how do we measure? So if I drove a 10% engagement in customer support, for example, did that lead to a 5% increase in customer renewals because they're more enthusiastic about what they're doing and therefore, doing a better job of getting their customers to renew? So, sort of trying to think about the actual business side of things as well. So they're kind of like the overarching principles. There's kind of a lot more to it, but so starting with your real user needs, testing your assumptions, building for the readiness and the context of the work you're actually doing, and measuring your impact beyond like, HR metrics and actually thinking about real business metrics.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is probably a sweeping statement and highly generalized, but I think we've all been in that place where we've picked tools that we love, that we think other people will love, and that the reality is your HRIS, like the employees in the business, aren't actually that fussed about what they use and how they use it or how pretty it is. Probably like they might be have a bit of an opinion on it, but you're probably picking something that you love and that you like using, and the reality is they have a very different user experience to you in terms of how they use it. And I don't personally think a lot of teams really, maybe because of lack of time and capacity, they don't have the opportunity to put themselves in their employees' shoes enough and understand, like, how do you see it, how do you interact with this thing, which is I think what we are slowly seeing a lot of people trying to do more of. So just think about like experience design a little bit. Then, like, what could people leaders do in this space if they're thinking about? We're talking about like future of HR tech here. So if they are thinking about like HR tech choices, what sort of things should they be thinking about when you consider like experience design? We've talked about like being able to visualize workflows, for example, is like a great one to think about. But anything else that either of you could add there that maybe could be practical sort of guidance?
Yeah, I think what Adam just said to me answers a lot of that question already. And I would just say from a tech vendor perspective, nearly every time when HR come to us, the 4 words we hear are "show me a demo," and they're probably asking 4 other vendors that same question. And that tells me that it's more of a decision based on looking for a solution and comparing features to features. We're tying into what Adam was just saying, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve a lot more, understanding what experience you're trying to build, and flipping it so that when you go to speak to a tech vendor, you're then saying, here's my challenges, this is what I want to solve, how do you and your platform solve these issues for me, rather than just the generic demo. And then discuss the key thing as well is discussing your own reality and asking how tech vendors will support that. And what I mean by your own reality is the size of business that you are. Is it growing? And if you're growing, then you're going to have iterative needs. So what works for a team of 50 is absolutely going to change for a team of 100. So can the tech support that journey? Are you just getting started and your team members have low maturity in performance processes or other HR processes? How can you keep them simple and see a maturity path for that to evolve? Has there been manager reluctance from past implementations? Maybe you need to take a much slower, more phased approach to rolling out. Can the tech support that? Even a lot of the time, surprisingly, we hear people that are in an organization and the strategy is being renewed, refreshed, changed, and they don't even have an anchor point to which they can tie their HR strategy to, because that's the nature of what's happening. So can the tech support those types of changes as they become apparent? Those types of realities, just put those problems onto the vendor to help them solve it, rather than just dazzling you with lots of nice features.
Awesome. What about you, Adam? Any tips, guidance, things that folks maybe should think about? I know you've come at this from maybe a slightly different lens, but you've been a people leader recently probably purchasing HR tech as well, and you've had a very like opinionated view on like and a view on this as well. So
yeah, I mean, I'll go to something Mark said, where it's like the first thing the HR leader will say is like, show me the demo. You know, like that was also very, I would always be one of those people saying that. But I think the first chat Mark and I ever had, we kind of like discussed like the questions that people are asking in that demo. Often, you know, Mark said to me, I think that he, you know, used to selling to finance people, and he was sort of like almost aghast at like the lack of like cutting questions that HR leaders were asking in terms of like, hey, can the platform do this? Show it to me, that sort of stuff. Yeah, like I think, you know, a demo is cool, but knowing the right questions is kind of important. So I'll go through some like quick fire, rapid like testing of key assumptions, I think, before you'd even start looking at like a solution that I think, you know, we should kind of ask. And I'll try and just speed through them quickly because I know we're getting short of time. So, you know, first thing is like, you know, what are your actual like user needs? It goes to your point before, Adam, about like we choose a system that like is nice for us, but are people actually going to, you know, use it? So, you know, like what are their actual user needs? How many actual different types of users do you have? Like most of our HR systems at least have like 4, like employees, manager, exec team, HR, admin. Sometimes you might actually have like board, like, you know, and then, you know, so like try and understand you've got different user types who have different user needs most likely. So start there, because actually you might find that you don't need a system. Mark probably doesn't want me to say that, but like, actually, you know, I know he wants people that know they need a system so they get value out of his system, right? Then ask some quick fire questions. So do people actually have the mental bandwidth to engage in a new system right now? So if you design the best system, it's awesome, but people are just so smashed, then you're not going to get utilization out of it. Try and understand what else is competing for people's focus. So we're launching a new HR system whilst the business is launching like a new sales strategy. Guess what? Sales strategy is going to trump our system. So stop your launch, do it later. Are we actually designing how we're going to use that system with the people that are actually going to use it in the environment where it's actually going to live? Like, don't build it in isolation from your teams. Co-design how you're actually going to use that solution with people from the business. Our roles are more facilitation in that regard. And from a success perspective, like what does it look like, you know, from a behavior perspective when this new system is like successfully like living in people's day-to-day flow? Like what's actually better in the business? How are they better at doing great work because of what we've done? And understand that upfront before you start, like actually even meeting vendors, because they're your success criteria. Like, you know, rather than just saying, hey, cool, we succeeded, we got a new system. Like, who gives a shit if the behaviors actually that you want to change didn't actually get better down the line? So like, you've got to be thinking around what's better in the business. How are people better enabled to deliver the company mission because of what it is we've put in place? And if you can't answer that question, stop until you can.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this like a do not pass go type scenario? Like even the user needs at the start. Like if you can't answer that, don't go any further until you've actually
gone back. Otherwise, you're going to waste a shitload of money.
I can't tell you, like, I can count on both hands already this year, like how many teams have spent the time investing in like buying a new tool and then realizing very quickly it doesn't actually do the thing that they want it to do, and they're in a contract, and like it's very hard to discover everything like upfront, but like basic stuff. And I think again, not enough time spent with the business in the business. Instead, actually, like, what do I want, or what do I want to be using, and how do I want to use it, is a big problem. So awesome checklist. I will grab them and share them with everyone afterwards as well. So thanks for rattling through that, Adam, because that's really helpful. Folks, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to, like, if anyone's got a question, feel free to raise your hand. You can jump in or throw it in chat. Otherwise, I've got a couple of things I just want to keep chatting about. So I'll keep going unless anyone's got anything that they want to jump in with. But just putting it out there, if you want to dive in and ask Mark or Adam anything, or just add to the conversation, please feel free to. So I give some space for that, for sure. But I guess, like, wanted to spend a couple of minutes just zooming out from like our tech, and like I always like to spend a bit of time on the human stuff, because we've touched on this a couple of times already. Like tech's great, obviously Mark, but like like it's all about how you apply it. You still have a human being who's reliant on doing the stuff right, and you think about personalization and trust building. Like there's a lot that could go wrong even if you get the perfect tech. So like, what sort of stuff do people still need to be doing well to get some of the personalization, automation, like journey piece working nicely if they get the right tech?
I think you're absolutely right. Tech should not be the driver. And I think I would say fundamentally, when any of this is approached, is a focus on operationalizing your own wonderful ways of working, your culture, that you want to nurture and scale. So when you tap into that, that's what makes your individual organization special. And then the second part is looking at the tech, even in coming up with how you you tap into your culture and the ways of working. There's obviously places where you can go for inspiration, best practices, other company templates, pre-configured tech processes. The key is knowing when to draw the line on getting that inspiration and then flipping it to run with your own processes. And that is where I would also say OpenOrg do a brilliant job. You've got that culture map, which actually helps people to diagnose their own culture. Plus, you've got the inspo from all of these templates that you're hosting as well. So, I think actually OpenOrg is a damn good place to start with that process. And I'd also say shake off the traditional HR lingo. It creates too much bias in our heads. I find it all the time. As soon as I say something like goal setting or feedback, I get an image. Instead, asking employees, how can we give you information about what you're doing to make your job better or make your life easier? Like, that's what feedback is. When you frame it like that, it just helps people to think more clearly without a preconceived notion of what some of this lingo means.
Awesome. I'm just going to jump in. Nahi's asked a question in chat, so I will. I don't know if that was directed at anyone in particular, Nahi, but I'm going to let you both just like absorb it quickly and feel free to jump in if you've got an answer. I think Adam, you've read it already, so
it's a brilliant question. It's not an easy one to answer in a short period of time because a lot of it probably depends on the context of the business. But one of the things that I would encourage people to sort of start to think about when it comes to our like HR systems is actual like measures of performance in the teams themselves. So, you know, like performance management is supposed to drive performance, but how do we actually like measure that? So work with, like, let's take engineering teams, for example, in a startup, scale-up environment. Work with your engineering leaders to come up with some metrics for their teams around how they're measuring performance in their tems. Outside of it, ignore a performance rating, but look at, you know, like things like, you know, throughput of kind of like features, feature adoption, for example, for you know, the features they're building, how many customers are actually taking them up. Look at things like ability to work on complex projects. So like throughput by itself is okay, but you also want to know, like, are they just doing easy work that's adding no value, or are they smashing through like the really hard kind of work? Like, you'll need to work with your engineering teams to understand what these metrics are. The interesting thing is that often the engineering teams won't be tracking this, like, because they don't do this either. So it's actually a lot of times with metrics from a HR perspective, like, oh, we need metrics to get to the seat at the table. Screw that. We need metrics and be able to be good at it because we can help the business get better at it as well. This is what I mean by switching from the 10% of HR to the 90% of the rest of the work. So once you've got those measures, then you start to sort of look at, okay, well, the teams that say, let's performance as an example, the teams that scored high performance ratings in our system, are they also the teams that actually scored high on the performance metrics that the engineering teams are tracking? So you can start to sort of see, okay, and if your performance system is highly focused on like feedback and growth and capability, what you should see is that if we're driving like a stronger growth and progression in our engineers from like building these systems, are we seeing increases in like the team performance as well? So I went quite specific there, but hopefully that gives some sort of idea of like how you move from like the HR metrics by themselves to actually tying that with business metrics.
Awesome. Mark, any quick adds to that? We're close to time, but I'm going to let you have a chance to sort of build on that.
A very quick add is when you're looking at it from a journey perspective, so these individual journeys, you can start to think, what does a successful outcome look like for the person who's been through this journey? And then you can start to wrap measurements around that. So you might say, if we're wanting people to receive coaching and feedback at least once a quarter, then maybe we have a pulse question that once a quarter just goes out to the people who have experienced that journey, and it says, I received helpful coaching and feedback in the last 90 days, yes or no? And then that can give you a barometer over whether that HR tech or that particular process is actually delivering the outcome that you're seeking from that particular process.
Yeah. And let's say that journey, sorry, I don't know, just build on it. So let's say that journey is like an onboarding journey. So like, and you're getting coaching and guiding and building relationships in the first 6 months. So you'd also then want to sort of be tracking like a say time to value metric. So like, and then tracking whether by people following our onboarding processes is the time for them adding value as an employee getting lower. Because then you're tracking it on that business metric as well, because like no one comes into the business. We don't just hire people to say, hey, we hired someone. We hire them to solve a business problem. So are we able to get them to be solving that business problem quicker through going through our custom journey? And if not, what changes can we make in the journey to be able to like drive that time to value down? So that's where you got this combination of tracking your metrics of like how many people completed the journey with the business metric and being able to then influence on multiple ways. Agree
on all counts. And like, yeah, my final 2 cents on this is definitely like, you've got to ask the question, is this going to improve how we work together? And by improve, it probably means, are we going to perform better? And by that, to Adam's point, like there's got to be metrics underpin this, but there's no generic metrics that every company should be applying. It's down to what that particular company is trying to achieve. And that company has to pick those metrics themselves and ground that in something, wherever they're heading. So identify the metrics, pick them, measure them, and yeah, there you go. Adam's hit the nail on the head there. So anyway, folks, we've run over time, so apologies for that. I know you've probably got stuff to go to, and some of you are eating lunch. Wherever you've joined from around the world, thank you so much for joining us and listening in. And yeah, connect with each other on LinkedIn, follow Adam and Mark, and come check out OpenOrg if you haven't already. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Also, a huge thank you to Adam for staying up so late. It's now 1 a.m. in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Well done, Adam.
All good.
Yeah, definitely check out OpenOrg stuff. It's brilliant.
All good. My pleasure. And thank you so much, everyone. And see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.